Let's not forget why Afghanistan is in a mess. Because of a superpower and its savior complex. For the United States, invasions are a pastime. They arrive all guns blazing. They make a meal of the situation and then cut and run. They did that in Vietnam, in Iraq, and now in Afghanistan. The fact is, the American war machine is sloppy. It is violent, pompous, and also very expensive. Thankfully for America, they have money to spare. That's how they sustain these destabilizing adventures, by burying blunders under piles of dollars. During a war, nobody is looking. All the focus is on winning the war. But now that America is leaving, it is time for a dissection. What did the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan cost America? Now remember, 20 years is a long time. That's a lot of guns, a lot of bullets. And this is the final bill. Total expenses, $2.26 trillion. That's how much America has spent since 2001 in Afghanistan. This is military spending plus development projects, $2.26 trillion, almost the entire GDP of Africa. Out of this, more than $800 billion is military spending. The aircraft, Humvees, tanks, ammunition, all of this costs money, of course. That's one part of the bill. Part two is development costs, what America conveniently calls nation building, although no one asked them to build nations. On this nation building, they have spent nearly $143 billion, $36 billion on dams and roads, more than $4 billion on humanitarian aid, $9 billion tackling narcotics. Even over 2 decades, this is a lot of money, and what does America have to show for it? A nation descending into civil war. Even the finances don't check out. Americans have always been notorious war profiteers, and until now, they paid for their own wars. But Afghanistan was different. Let me explain. During the Korean War in 1950, tax rates were up 92%. During the Vietnam War, they were raised by 77%. Both times, America raised funds by taxing their rich. Now look at Afghanistan. When the war began, George Bush actually slashed taxes by 8%. It was part of his trickle-down theory. So how did Washington pay for this insanely expensive campaign? By borrowing. The US had 2 big military operations in this century, Iraq and Afghanistan, and for these 2 wars, America borrowed nearly $2 trillion. And with loans, we know, comes interest. They have paid nearly $530 billion in interest, $530 billion. So the war may have ended, but the expenses have not. Next comes the human cost of the war. More than 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, along with 3,000 plus military contractors. As for the survivors, they will need lifelong medical support. That's another $1.6 trillion. Now, don't get us wrong. This is America's money, their loans. They can spend it any way they like. But when you're in the business of invading and occupying, you must see the mission through. And that's where Washington has failed yet again. They lit the fuse and bolted from the room. They spent billions upgrading Afghan infrastructure only to leave it on a platter for the Taliban. Does America admit its failure? Not even close. Joe Biden says the US has achieved its goals in Afghanistan, not a first for an American president. In 2003, George Bush declared victory in Iraq. He spoke to his troops with a mission accomplished banner hanging behind him. 18 years later, US troops are still lumbering in Iraq. You see, the Americans don't lose. They just confidently deny failure. And who pays for these failures? Not the US. Countries are left to fend for themselves. Like right now, the Taliban is sweeping across Afghanistan. What is the US doing about it? No air support, no warnings. They're busy organizing symbolic military ceremonies. Like I said, pompous but sloppy. America's midnight dash will cost Afghanistan dearly. Let me tell you what's at stake. 2.6 million Afghans have fled the country. Any hope of their return has been quashed. Nearly 40% of Afghan girls attend school today. When the Taliban ruled, it was 0%. Reports say those old diktats are returning. Afghanistan is being dragged to the dark ages. On a truck driven by the Taliban, on a highway paved by the Americans. There is a gaping power vacuum in the region right now. Pakistan has dropped any pretense of shadow support. They're openly backing the Taliban. For China, a new frontier has opened up, a chance to firm up its plans for the Belt and Road Initiative. And within Afghanistan, there is violence and fear. Who will take responsibility for this mistake? America should, but they won't. They have packed up the circus and moved to the next town. Perhaps another nation for them to save. Perhaps after 20 years, we'll have another $1 trillion bill and nothing to show for it. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.